this is one thing that we are very conscious of. We have coming of age now a generation of young people who were raised marinated in commercial culture. I mean, they literally were subjected. Every young person raised in a normal home in the United States has seen, is it 5,000 commercials before they get to...
The commercials are in everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's the numbers, I've seen, the research is just stunning. And so we have young people having come of age in this. Now, your countrywoman, Naomi Klein, wrote No Logo and suggested that there actually does come a point where you've had so much commercial culture jammed down your throat that you actually do retch. And we've seen it in this movement. We have young people at these conferences, not as many as we'd like, but I would tell you more than just about any social movement you will see. And I think one of the reasons for that is that there are very few spaces in the dialogue about media and in media itself today where young people are told, look, we look at you as human beings, not as ratings points or targets for our sales operations. And we think that's a really important part of this. Unless we break through the contemporary media culture, we run the risk of raising generations of people, citizens, who don't think of themselves as citizens, but who actually understand themselves as consumers. And that is a very dangerous thing, because when people think of themselves as consumers, they assume that things happen to them, right? That they are told what to do and then they go out and act upon that. Citizens, ideally, decide what they want and make it happen. We want a media system that promotes citizenship rather than consumerism.
Well, I think it's an absolute scandal, personally, that we have pharmaceutical advertising. And I wish Free Press had 10 times as many employees so we could make that a major issue. I wish there were another group making a major issue we could support, which would even be better, because we're not trying to hog everything. But I think the idea that, I mean, we have a healthcare crisis that has many components, and you know that better than anyone. But pharmaceutical advertising contributes to the problem with drug prices, but also one of the great laws of media that scholars know is that if you advertise in a publication, your chances of getting critical coverage of your industry drop dramatically. And I think the classic case we all have in that is cigarette smoking. All the evidence shows it, where it's just blatant, where publications which had cigarette advertising in them, they barely covered cigarette smoking as a health issue. And magazines that don't have cigarette advertising covered as it is. It's one of the great killers of the last century.
One of the things also that we're very conscious of is that increasingly there are industries which have found unique conduits into the homes of the American people via the current media system. And so we find ourselves in the fascinating position now of having some of our biggest challenges as regards going before the FCC, working with Congress, is not the broadcasters, right? It's not the folks that you think of as your usual target, but it's also all sorts of other folks who think, no, we don't want this media system to change because it's a dream come true. We get to go into people's homes and tell them to demand this drug from their doctor. And so we now have a situation where we are not merely talking about changing a media system, we are talking about changing a much larger system that feeds through it. And it's something that Bob and I learned early on in this struggle, because I think though we care about media so much, we came to these issues with a broader democracy sense. And in many senses, one of our first issues we cared about was campaign finance reform. And it was a great revelation to us when we realized that the top lobbyists against campaign finance reform are not crooked politicians. In fact, most politicians would love campaign finance reform. The number one lobbyist is the broadcasting industry, which loves the ads. And so there's a huge interplay between advertising, the broadcasters, and industries that frankly think that this current system is just fine.
What we have in the United States, in a nutshell, is a political system in which the candidates who get taken seriously are candidates who have lots of money or represent people with lots of money, one or both of those criteria. And if they don't meet those criteria, they're out of luck in the way our political system is set up. And the news media in a credible democracy has two choices at the fork in the road. It can reinforce that process and say, okay, you know, Donald Trump has $3 billion, so if he decides to run as an independent, he's a serious candidate. But Ralph Nader isn't, because he doesn't have $3 billion. Or what a news media in a democratic society could do is say, we're not going to let money dictate who the serious candidates are. We think we have an obligation to cover all the candidates and let people decide and win out down. Obviously, I think the latter is what they should do. Obviously, the latter is not what they do. In media reform, one of the reasons we're here, a lot of this grew out of people frustrated in the 2000 election for exactly that reason.
One other component of this, too, which I think it becomes exceptionally hard to explain capitalism without a critique. That doesn't mean someone can be a passionate capitalist and support the system, but when there is no critique, it becomes very, very difficult. And it's a funny thing that one need not be a socialist to see the value of socialist ideas being thrown into the mix, thrown into the debate. And in most of the world, that is exceptionally common. It is a given. It's not people would not imagine that you couldn't have this breadth of ideas and then use it, let people use it as they choose. In America, I believe very much as a legacy of the Cold War, we have a situation where we have a huge host of ideas and explanations and notions that would be valuable for advancing the discourse that are literally left out because most journalists are terrified to put it in. And they think, oh, well, the people couldn't stomach it. When I was an editor at the Toledo Blade, which is a very mainstream daily newspaper in Toledo, Ohio, and the Berlin Wall came down, I invited Gus Hall, the head of the American Communist Party, to write about it, and write about Gorbachev. And you know, I can't say that Gus's piece was great literature, but it was a perspective. And you know what? I had so many people, including conservative Republicans in Toledo, say, thank you. That was really interesting, and it was really useful. The American people can handle a broad discourse from left to right, from libertarian to socialist. Unfortunately, our media denies that to them, and as a result, I think, causes a stilted discourse, which makes it far less likely that we will solve real problems in this country.
And I'd only add one thing, because we have a lot of questions. I mean, the media actually is worse than that in some ways. I think they serve as the police people,
Yes.
the borders of what's legitimate opinion. And that's almost the thing that makes you angriest, is the border cops.
Well, today candidates are, Tom Harkin, the former senator from Iowa, said that when he ran for president in 1992, his name was actually in the papers. They had a save get key on the computer that was Tom Harkin, the liberal from Iowa who cannot win.
Yeah. The one they dust off.
Before there was a primary. What we did in the nation this week was something that's a little bit rare. And a new thing, a result of the media reform movement. We looked at the candidates, what their records are on media, what they're saying about media, and put it into some kind of perspective for this year, this election. And well, I haven't seen that anyplace else, so I think that's an important perspective.
Actually, it's a two-part question.
I will tell you that Norman Solomon's War Made Easy, and frankly, Norman's writing in general, I think is really superb media criticism. I would be exceptionally cautious about saying he's the best, because just about everybody who does it is a friend of mine. I would also suggest that Media Matters has just come out with a book called The Real McCain, which I've read a lot of books about McCain, some good, some bad. The thing I loved about this is it really had perspective on the media's relationship with McCain and how the media, sort of forgives a lot of stuff. I just thought it was a brilliant book and very, very good media criticism.
I have bad news, everyone. We have to be clear out of here right now because Dan Rather's scheduled for press conference in here. I'm more than willing to take questions outside.
Are we doing the hallway or?
I'll another half hour. I'll take them outside or stay here and talk with Dan Rather.
Yeah, which maybe
we have to leave this room.
Thank you. Sorry for being in and out so quick.
John?
Yeah.